I don't know if other people have questions.
Of course I do.
All right.
So let me set the stage for this question. I have a friend who teaches in the Louisiana university system, the state school university system. And this summer she actually ended up staying with her parents up north because she couldn't get a summer job in and around greater New Orleans because there were no summer jobs because the oil workers, you know, it's a trickle-down effect. Did you see that? Did you talk to those folks that can't work at McDonald's because not enough people are coming through, you know, for a real human impact on what this is doing aside from the food chain issues?
But what I saw just walking the streets of New Orleans, it's a little depressing. It's a depressing town because there's the understanding or the belief that there's a lot of crime around. You walk into a CVS, they have alarms on the top of liquor bottles that sell for $7. They lock up their shaving cream. They lock up their antiperspirant. $3 antiperspirant is behind the locks. I mean, up here, you might lock away an $18 razor blade. Down there, they're locking everything up. And people on the street are asking for money, as in any other large city. But there's just a feeling that they haven't bounced back. And people I've talked to, and the census numbers I looked at, bear this out, that they had 500,000 or so people before Katrina in the city. They lost 300,000 people who have not returned yet after the storm. So that city is down by if you do the math, I don't know how you do the math, 2/3? 3/6? I don't know.
3/5.
Okay, they're down by 3/5 in population, which might make you think that, well, you lose that many people, you got to have other people do the jobs. There are still people without jobs down there. And I talked to bartenders, and I talked to restaurateurs, talked to tour people down there. And what they told me was that business is fine. They had people coming in. The tourism in New Orleans proper is fine because it's so far from the situation. But I don't know that the city has bounced back from Katrina, which is a totally different topic. I mean, you got Spike Lee doing a film on that. I was driven around the city by a guy who does lending down there and has some real estate down there. And we looked at a number of apartment complexes and housing complexes where people had just abandoned houses. Now they're drug houses or gang houses, or they're just turned to mold and falling in on themselves. And the trouble is that if you have that house in the complex, who's going to want to move into the house next door, no matter what it's priced at? And the money hasn't been used to clean everything up yet. So it's a little depressing. There's an air of defeat still down there. The other thing I learned from an engineer over in the Gulf Coast, over in Mississippi, I guess I was over in Biloxi and I was talking with her, she was saying that when a hurricane comes, you have a set calendar, you have a set window where you know the hurricane's coming. You can track it out there, and now they have the models that tell you exactly where it's going to slam you. And you can look at it and be like, okay, I have 4 days to board everything up and get out of here. I know that it's coming. And I know that 2 or 3 days after it's gone, I can get out of the Winnebago up in Tennessee and then come back down to my house, clean up the debris, and get back to life, and hopefully the power's back on. When you have something like the oil spill, you don't have a set time frame. You don't know what's going to happen as far as how can you plan for that. The spill happens in April, and you think, okay, we have the technology to stop this thing. If it doesn't get cleaned up for 100 days, day after day, you're just hoping that it's going to stop. And you don't know what to pin your hopes on because you can't even get any access. That was one of the other big things. We talk in social media about transparency. One of the big failures of this whole oil spill campaign was that there wasn't any communication for a huge portion of it. Right before I went down, everything opened up. Finally, the Joint Command and everyone who was running the situation opened their lines of communication and provided true access to journalists across the board. Well, that's what I found.
That's not correct.
I'll let you ask a question in a minute.
All right. Disagree with
so what I found when I was down there was that access was granted and people could really find out and report exactly what was going on. The the problem before that was that people, if they were given access or not, were raising a flag that they weren't being given access. So, what's your question, Ellen? And don't presume that a journalist should know exactly how the Joint Command and the military and the Coast Guard and the governments should respond.
I'm not presuming anything.
Okay.
I just want to point out the fact that for the first time in a major incident, the Joint Information Center, which is the structure under which the government gives out information during large events, within a couple of days of this happening, had a Twitter account, a Facebook page, a website, and a place to go. They were live streaming press conferences. They were posting pictures of the oiled birds, and I don't think there's been a government effort in a major incident ever that's been this transparent. The access issue comes in that there's a zone around whatever the issue is, okay? And the person who's in charge is responsible for the safety of the people within that zone. You can't just have people willy-nilly coming in and out. And journalists and other people resisted working their way through the system, and the system was overwhelmed, I'm sure, at some point. But I think this is one of the most transparent things that's ever happened in terms of live streaming, putting photos up. Every day, 2 or 3 times a day, there's an update of how many people are out there and the equipment they're using. And I think that the government did a phenomenal job getting information out from within a couple of days of this starting. So I disagree with you on that point. And the access thing, I think, is more of a process thing than a philosophical, no, we don't want anyone to look thing.
But as good as the government may have been, if you saw Spike Lee's piece, he makes the argument that BP wasn't sharing any information with the government. So while they shared what they had, they didn't have very much information.
Yeah, BP, this wasn't their shining moment. And they...
Let me get my life back.
Yeah.
Let me get my life back.
Well, I think the other thing, and it came out of the Exxon Valdez spill, actually, the Oil Spill Pollution Act of 1990. You wanted BP, the way that it all was structured really is working the way it's intended to, in that if the government had gone in and taken over the spill, BP would have been relieved of their financial obligation to pay for it. So the way they structured things, they've held BP as the responsible party, so now they're responsible for paying. So a lot of people didn't understand that at the beginning, and because people were focused on trying to find the tidal waves of oil and the requisite dirty bird that everyone has in their trunk, I'm always wondering, yeah, you take pictures of the oil birds, I'd be curious to look at the ratio of oil bird pictures to birds released back into the wild pictures. Is that a story to journalists? Do they only want to see the oil birds, or are they covering the recovery as well?
Part of it is maybe a lesson in how journalists work. And the mantra that if it bleeds, it leads holds true. I mean, if a story is going to be sensational, it's going to make the front pages. It's going to be something that everyone chases down. My contention before is also that journalists they're tasked with keeping government honest. So if the government is releasing their videos, their photos, their version of what's happening, journalists want to confirm that for themselves. And if they're not given access to go confirm that themselves, there's still not that transparency that the people are looking for. It's all well and good if they're going to create a moon landing video and show it to everyone, but if a journalist isn't given access to go out into the water to confirm this themselves, then there is an issue there. And I know your argument is that they should go through the system and get proper credentials and everything.
How is live streaming?
But
how is live streaming a press conference, live streaming that's happening at this moment, creating a moonwalk? That's ridiculous.
Moon landing.
Moon landing,
Just 2
moonwalk,
words.
same thing. Bouncy house, whatever.
Right.
Live streaming is live streaming.
Well, my point being that they got better at the end because they did allow access. It was a piece of cake at the end for people to get access to go out and see the water with the booms in it, to have access in the air. And there was a roadblock there for a while. And I know it has to do with the process, but journalists don't understand the process and they're not beholden to that.
But what about the 400 people, the 400 sorties of the Joint Information Center allowed in the first 30 days on water and in the air. Journalists were certainly being allowed to get out there. The responsibility of the incident command, you need to know who's flying in your area. It was an enormous square-mile area. It's the safety of the people who are out there and the journalists. You can't just get in a boat and go in the middle of a hot zone in the middle of an incident. And to me, if you're a true journalist and you're doing your homework and you're going on an assignment, there's this thing, even on my phone, called Google. And there are plenty of ways to figure this out. And full disclosure, I was in the Coast Guard. I am biased, but I think that there was plenty of access. Just because people didn't get access because they refused to or didn't know how to use the system isn't an excuse. People were allowed
Isn't
access.
sometimes the access that they're providing is, here we have 100 volunteers and 100 BP people cleaning up this one section of beach. Let's all go to this and come to this little event and take a look at this. And when you come back 3 days later, and there's still the oil slick, and there's still the birds, and still the problem going on, they're not there anymore. They've moved on to the next sanctioned.